Hi, I'm Kaylin. At my sister's office party, she humiliated me, mocked my thrift store blazer, laughed about my job in front of her CEO, then whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's just a +1 mistake Mom couldn't fix." I stayed silent. But what no one knew was who I really was. And when her boss walked in, looked at me and said, "Good evening, ma'am." Her face went pale. "Now tell me, what would you have done in my shoes?" Before we dive in, drop a comment. Where are you listening from, and have you ever been betrayed by your own family just to boost their image? Let's begin. I was halfway through reheating leftover soup when my phone buzzed, one of those sharp, indifferent vibrations that make your stomach turn before you even look. Seraphine. "Hey. There's a small thing at the office tonight you can swing by if you're free. Rooftop on 5th, 7 p.m. No, hope to see you. No exclamation points. Just those clipped little phrases that always felt more like instructions than invitations. And yet, I stared at the screen, rereading it like maybe I'd missed something kind. For a few seconds, I let the microwave continue humming as I stood motionless in my kitchen. Did she really want me there? Or was this a favor to Mom, to make things look less bad in front of her coworkers? The soup beeped behind me, but I couldn't move. My hand hovered over my phone. Then I walked to my closet. I didn't have anything flashy, never cared to. I chose a modest navy dress, the kind that whispered effort but didn't beg for attention. I added a simple pair of earrings and pulled my hair back into a low twist. Not fancy, just presentable. I tucked a small bouquet of white freesias into a gift bag and wrote "Congrats" in my neat, looping handwriting. By 6:30, I was walking toward the building on 5th, and that's when I saw it. Uplights illuminating a tall rooftop garden, a sleek glass elevator glowing from within, women in silk gowns and men in fitted blazers sipping champagne through laughter. I should have turned around right there. But I didn't. The doorman barely glanced at me as I stepped into the elevator. At the top, the doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped into what felt like another world. Tables draped in ivory linen, waiters in white gloves, designer heels clicking on marble tiles. I felt every thread of my off-rack department store dress. The bouquet in my bag felt like a paperweight now. I clutched it anyway and scanned the room. Seraphine didn't see me right away, or maybe she did and pretended not to. Either way, I stood alone by the bar for a full 5 minutes before she appeared in a crimson cocktail dress that hugged her body like it had been made for her. "Kaylin," she said, smiling with her mouth but not her eyes. "I'm surprised you made it." "Got your message," I said, trying to match her tone but falling flat. "Thought it might be nice." She glanced at the gift bag and blinked. "Oh, that's sweet." Then, like I was an afterthought, she gestured behind her. "Come say hi to my team." I followed. The circle parted, slightly to make room. Seraphine leaned in. "This is Kaylin, my little sister," she said, letting the words linger like I was someone's pet bird. "She works at a community library, brings story time to the little ones." She chuckled softly. "She even brought flowers. Isn't she adorable?" A woman beside her sipped her drink and asked, "Oh, are you her assistant?" I opened my mouth to correct her, but Seraphine beat me to it. No, she's family," she said, though we all thought she was a +1 mistake when she walked in." A few people laughed. Seraphine smirked and took another sip of her wine, like she hadn't just sliced me open in front of strangers. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. Instead, I pressed my thumb against the loose pearl button on my sleeve. It had been my grandmother's dress, one she used to wear to church, simple but dignified. I ran my finger over that button like it might anchor me in place. "Excuse me," I murmured, stepping away before I lost the ability to keep my face calm. I moved to the edge of the rooftop, where the breeze cut through the heat of my skin and the city lights blinked far below like a quieter world. I stood there alone, breathing in the silence, watching my reflection ripple in the glass railing. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them toast their titles and high heels and carefully curated cruelty. I had nothing they valued, but I had a spine, and tonight that was enough. I closed my eyes for a moment, then as I opened them again, I heard it, a hush spreading through the crowd behind me, a ripple of attention shifting, then footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. "I was hoping I'd run into you again," said a voice behind me, low, familiar, and just loud enough for the room to hear. Boy, I didn't have time to turn before I heard his voice behind me, measured, confident, warm. "I was hoping I'd run into you again." A hush fell over the rooftop like someone had flipped a switch. Conversations halted mid-laugh. The background music suddenly felt distant, like it belonged to another night. I turned slowly, not because I was playing coy, but because I honestly wasn't sure he meant me. He did. Mr. Edwin Langston, CEO of the multi-billion-dollar firm where my sister had clawed her way up the ranks, stood in front of me with an ease that made the air feel thicker. He wasn't scanning the crowd for someone more important. He wasn't offering a distracted nod or a half smile like so many others had tonight. He looked directly at me. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, clearly, deliberately, before extending his hand. Not just a handshake with both hands, warm, respectful, deliberate, the kind of greeting people give to someone they already admire. I took his hand, careful not to let mine tremble. "Nice to see you again, Mr. Langston." Behind him, Seraphine's posture stiffened like she'd swallowed a stone. Somewhere across the patio, I heard someone mutter, "Did she say again?" Edwin smiled. "You look well, Kaylin." The sound of my name coming from him, so plainly without prefix, without explanation, sent a ripple through the room. I nodded politely, my voice steady. "It's been a while. Thank you for remembering." "I couldn't forget," he said, and it wasn't flattery. It was fact. People had stopped pretending not to watch. A woman near the bar lowered her glass without drinking. A few junior partners whispered. Even the catering staff slowed. Seraphine stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Langston, I didn't know you and my sister had met." He turned slightly, acknowledging her with a polite smile that didn't last. "We crossed paths a couple years ago." She gave a talk I happened to attend on early literacy access. That night stayed with me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Not from embarrassment, but the strange disorientation of being seen after years of being invisible. 2 years ago, I'd been invited to speak at a closed roundtable on public literacy initiatives. Edwin had attended in secret, one of the anonymous donors funding our pilot program for mobile libraries. I hadn't known who he was until after the fact. He'd sent a handwritten letter, thanking me for putting words to something he'd felt but never heard articulated. Back then, I thought it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, a kind letter from a powerful man who'd never remember my name. Now here he was, remembering everything. "Well," Seraphine chirped, trying to sound breezy, "Kaylin's always been good at community things." Edwin's brow lifted only slightly. "She's more than good. She understands what dignity looks like when it's not profitable. That's a rare trait." The words landed in the air with a soft thud. Someone near the fire pit blinked. I could almost hear thoughts shifting. Then he looked down at the gift bag I was still holding awkwardly at my side. I'd forgotten about it. It was simple, white with a navy ribbon, holding fresh-cut wildflowers I'd arranged myself before coming. "May I?" he asked, gently touching the edge of the tissue paper. I handed it over. "Of course, just something small." He looked inside and smiled. "These are exactly the kind of gifts that carry heart. Not everything is about logos and LinkedIn." Someone actually coughed into their drink. I glanced sideways. One of Seraphine's colleagues, maybe a PR director, was now eyeing me like I'd walked in holding a press badge instead of peonies. "I think I need a moment," I said softly, motioning toward the balcony railing. Edwin nodded. "Enjoy the view. And Kaylin, thank you again. We need more voices like yours." I stepped away, not quickly. I didn't want to look like I was running, but inside, I was reeling. By the time I reached the far side of the terrace, I could hear the buzz starting again. Not laughter, chatter. Whispers trying to make sense of what just happened. People didn't know what box to put me in anymore. I stood still, palms flat on the cool edge of the railing, staring at the city below. Lights blinking, tiny cars moving with quiet certainty. I focused on the motion, on something that didn't ask me to explain who I was or why I'd come. For a moment, I breathed. Then I felt it, heels clicking too fast behind me. Seraphine. She caught up just as I stepped into the corridor leading toward the restrooms. Her fingers closed around my forearm, not painfully, but not gently either. "What did you say to him before tonight?" she hissed, eyes wide, smile gone. Her voice was low but urgent, edged with something brittle. I turned and looked her straight in the eye. Calm, not defensive. "Nothing," I said evenly. "I just told the truth. 2 years ago." Her fingers tightened. "He doesn't talk to people like that. He doesn't even look at our regional VPs like that. What are you doing here?" I could have said so many things, but instead I held her gaze and answered simply, "You invited me." And then, for the first time that night, I smiled. Not to charm, to remind her I was done shrinking. I paused outside the powder room, her grip still tight on my arm. Her voice had lost the polished charm it wore all evening. "What did you say to him before tonight?" she demanded, a sharp whisper with eyes so wide I could see the fear hiding just beneath the panic. I didn't pull away. I just looked at her, calm and steady. "I didn't say anything, Seraphine, but maybe he remembers what matters." She let out a dry laugh that didn't quite land. "Please. You're not the kind of person people remember." I didn't answer that, not with words. I stepped away slowly, walked into the restroom, and locked the stall behind me. The tile was cold against my heels, and the sound of distant jazz from the reception felt like it belonged to another world. Her words didn't sting the way she'd intended. Not anymore. They confirmed something deeper, something I'd been too proud or too blind to acknowledge until now. Because the truth was, she was wrong. Edwin Langston did remember me, not for my name or my face, but for my work, for my voice, for the fire in my chest when I spoke about the kids who needed books more than they needed smartphones. He wasn't faking that greeting, and Seraphine knew it, but her panic told me something else. She wasn't just surprised, she was afraid. And fear always comes from knowledge, that something you did, years ago, might come back to collect. As I washed my hands and stared at my own reflection, a memory bubbled up, one I hadn't touched in a long time. I was 9. It was the holiday photo shoot, those stiff, expensive ones our mother booked every year at the department store with matching sweaters and fake fireplaces. I'd spent the morning brushing my hair, picking my dress, even ironing it myself. But when the photographer called the family in, Mom had only waved Seraphine forward. "She'll go first," she said. "Just her this year. We'll do group photos another time." But there was no group photo. There never was. And when my science fair ribbon came in that spring, 2nd place at state level, I showed it to Dad in the kitchen, bursting with pride. He glanced once, smiled, and said, "Didn't Seraphine also do a project? Bring me hers, too." She had glued paper leaves onto cardboard. He framed hers. I learned early what Seraphine knew how to do best, redirect the spotlight, even when she didn't earn it. Back in the hallway, I rejoined the party with a polite nod to the bartender. I wasn't going to let her steal tonight from me, too, but I couldn't shake a different memory now. One not from childhood, but from my career. 5 years ago, I'd applied for a grant from the Alton Fund, a philanthropy foundation tied to several Fortune 500 firms, including Edwin's. It had been a long shot, but I believed in the proposal. A mobile literacy van to serve rural school districts. I poured weeks into it, crafted every word, and right before submission, Seraphine offered to review it for polish. She smiled. "I know people at the fund. Let me make sure it's solid." That application was later disqualified. No explanation, just a rejection notice. I never thought much of it, just bad luck. But tonight, Watching the flicker in her expression, the dots connected. Back at home, well past midnight, once the house was quiet, I sat on the floor with my old laptop, the one I hadn't opened in years. I dug through email backups, forgotten folders. Then there it was, a forwarded email thread. Subject line, R.E. Kaylin Grant application. A reply from a junior staffer at Alton Fund. Applicant lacks strategic vision. Suggest redirect, potential issue with long-term impact analysis. But the oddest part? The original sender. It wasn't from me. It was from a personal email I recognized, Seraphine's. She'd sent in a version of my grant under her account, altered, stripped down, twisted. She had sent it on my behalf, and sabotaged it, and the message had been forwarded to me only once, by mistake, years ago, and then buried. I sat there, staring at the words, heart steady, no tears, no gasps, just a slow, aching exhale. So that's how far she'd gone, not just undermining me in conversation. She'd actively rewritten my work and handed it to the wolves. I copied the email, texted it to myself, then locked the laptop and slipped it back under the bed. This wasn't the moment to confront her, not yet, because the best stories, the ones people actually remember, are the ones that unfold quietly until they can't be ignored. A few minutes later, as I made some chamomile tea, the family group chat lit up. A ping, then another. From Seraphine, "So honored to be recognized by Mr. Langston tonight. What an incredible event. Truly grateful." And then, from our mother, "You always make us proud, darling. The grace you carry is unmatched. No mention of me, of course not." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I clicked on Seraphine's name and opened a private message. My fingers hovered for just a second. Then I typed slowly, carefully. "You really want to play this game again? I suggest you don't." And I hit send. Seraphine didn't respond right away. She just stared at her phone like it had bitten her. I didn't wait for her reply. I walked straight past the banquet hall exit, away from the crowd and the clinking champagne flutes. The cool air outside was a welcome slap, grounding. I stood there for a moment under the night sky, letting the last echoes of applause fade behind me. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep, not after what I'd just found. That rejection email from years ago, the one I never received directly, was still glowing on my screen. Applicant lacks strategic vision. A phrase that felt clinical but cruel. And the sender? An old address connected to Seraphine's consulting firm. I kept circling one question in my mind. What else had she erased? The next morning, after barely 3 hours of rest, I skipped my usual coffee routine and instead took the bus to the university campus where I'd worked as a research assistant over a decade ago. The ride was quiet, mostly students with headphones, a few tired professors. I was probably the only one there chasing a ghost. The admin building hadn't changed much. Faded brick, ivy crawling higher than I remembered. I walked past the glass display case with dusty awards, turned right, and found the same reception desk. Behind it sat a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses. Her nameplate read Karen. I cleared my throat. "Hi, I was wondering if someone could help me look up archived recommendation packets from, well, about 12 years ago." She looked up, squinting, then softened. "Oh, honey, you're Kaylin, aren't you?" I blinked. "Yes." Karen stood up. "Of course I remember. You helped Dr. O'Malley with that ethics research. You were sharp. We all thought you moved to D.C. after getting that grant, didn't you?" I shook my head slowly. "I didn't get it. My packet was rejected. That's actually why I'm here." Karen frowned. "That's strange. I'm almost certain we sent it out, including your full application and Dr. O'Malley's letter. He was so proud of that one." The breath left my lungs for a second. "Dr. O'Malley wrote a letter?" I asked, my voice tight. She nodded. "Sure did. Sent it to the same address all the packets went through, some external contact from the foundation side, if I remember. You'd marked someone named Seraphine?" I didn't reply. I just thanked her, gave a polite smile, and stepped out onto the steps. My hands were already shaking when I dialed the number I still had saved from back then, Dr. O'Malley's old office line. It went to voicemail. I sat under an old oak tree near the quad and tried again, this time his personal number from an old email chain I'd found last night. To my surprise, he picked up. "Hello? Dr. O'Malley, it's Kaylin. Kaylin Shaw." There was a pause and then warmth rushed in. "Kaylin? My goodness, it's been years. I heard you got passed over for that grant. I couldn't believe it." "That's actually why I'm calling." I hesitated. "I never saw the letter you wrote for me. I didn't even know it existed." He went quiet. "That can't be. I worked on it for weeks. It was glowing. About your ethics, your leadership, your potential. I sent it to the email you provided. It was some company email. Seraphine something. She was listed as your contact?" "Yes," I whispered. There was a pause again. Then he said, slower this time, "I still have the letter, the PDF copy timestamped. Want me to send it?" "Yes, please." It hit my inbox 15 minutes later. I read it sitting on a bench facing the science library, hands trembling. His words were everything I'd ever hoped someone might see in me. He described me as deeply ethical, driven by questions of real consequence, and said I was the kind of thinker this field needs more of. At the top of the email, "To be submitted on behalf of applicant, sent to Seraphine." That was the last piece. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there with the sun warming the side of my face and the weight of years settling across my chest. She hadn't just sabotaged my future, she'd stolen the praise that might have kept me going. I forwarded the email to a secure folder and backed it up to an external drive. Then I stood, brushed the leaves from my coat, and made my way home. It was almost dusk when I walked back into my apartment. The hallway was quiet. I passed a photo I hadn't looked at in years. Me and Seraphine, sitting on the stoop as kids, our knees scraped from summer play. I reached up and took it off the wall. I didn't break it. I didn't throw it. I just placed it in a drawer and shut it. Then, after changing into something more comfortable and tying my hair back, I opened my laptop. I hovered over my LinkedIn profile. My job history was up to date. My credentials were solid, but I clicked the title. It had read Consultant Shaw Impact Group. I deleted it and typed instead, Founder, Langston Futures Fund. It wasn't public yet, not officially, but the paperwork was done. The fund was real. I stared at the Save Changes button, and then, with a calm I hadn't felt in years, I clicked it. The game had just begun. I stared at the blinking cursor beside the new job title, Founder Langston Futures Fund, and clicked Save. There wasn't a sound in the room, just the soft hum of my heater and the faint tick of the wall clock, but inside me, something had shifted. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. The next morning, a card slipped under my apartment door caught my eye as I walked back from making coffee. Pale gold with an all-too-familiar floral border. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, and always just a bit too formal for something meant to be warm. You are expected at Thanksgiving. It's the least you could do, after all Seraphine's done for this family. Not invited. Not, we'd love to have you. Expected. For a few seconds I just stood there, staring at the card, reading it again as if a second look might soften the tone. It didn't. And yet, I didn't tear it up. I didn't even toss it. I left it on the counter next to my mug. Like everything else with my family, it would sit there, unspoken, a weight without words. I didn't RSVP. I never did. But on Thursday, around 2 in the afternoon, I pulled on my gray wool coat, wrapped a simple scarf around my neck, and drove the familiar 30 minutes to the house where Seraphine now hosted every holiday like a queen returning to her throne. The driveway was lined with SUVs and freshly detailed sedans. I pulled into a spot by the curb, away from the paved semicircle where important guests were allowed to double park. My car, a practical dented Honda I'd had for nearly 10 years, sat like a quiet protest among the gleam. As I reached the front door, it swung open before I could knock. "Kaylin!" Seraphine's voice rang out in faux delight, arms spread wide. "Still driving that same old car?" A few chuckles drifted from inside. Someone muttered, "Classic K." I smiled faintly, nodding, and stepped into the entryway where the smell of rosemary, cinnamon, and something fried mixed with perfume and ambition. Her home hadn't changed much. Just more marble, more chandeliers, fewer memories. She steered me toward the dining room like a hostess checking off a box, her fingers grazing my elbow briefly, performatively. Dinner was a polished affair: cloth napkins, monogrammed plates, place cards with gold leafing. I was seated at the far end, diagonally opposite Seraphine, with a view of the curated chaos. My mother was already sipping wine. My father sat stiffly beside her, tapping a rhythm against his knee that I recognized from childhood. It meant he wanted to speak, but knew better. Halfway through the meal, Seraphine stood, her wine glass raised high like she'd practiced it. "I just want to take a moment," she said, "to honor the people who keep this family shining. Mom for always knowing what's best, Dad for being the rock, and of course my husband for being my biggest cheerleader, and our next generation, so bright, so full of promise." She listed off names, accomplishments, law school, med school, real estate empires, but not mine, not once. Then, with a syrupy smile, she added, "And to those who choose smaller lives, may they find peace too." There was a ripple of laughter, then silence. I didn't say a word. I simply reached for the breadbasket and passed it down. I'd learned by now. Silence has sharp edges. Moments later, my youngest nephew, Eli, about 9, leaned over, innocence written all over his freckled face. "Aunt Kay, do you have a job?" Before I could answer, Seraphine cut in with a grin too wide. "She freelances here and there, sweetie. You know, dreams are hard to let go of." I looked down at my plate, then at Eli. "That's a good question," I said softly. "Let's talk about it when you're older." That was the last thing I said that night. I put down my fork, took one sip from my glass of water, and stood. I gave a slight nod to my father. His foot stopped tapping, and walked out, coat in hand. No slamming doors, no grand exits. Just my heels tapping on the wood floors and then crunching softly against the gravel outside. The sun had dipped low by the time I got to my car. A single leaf stuck to the windshield, bright red against the glass. I didn't brush it off. Back at my apartment, the warmth of the room felt foreign. I dropped my keys in the dish by the door, slipped off my boots, and turned on the lamp beside the couch. I sat down, pulled my laptop onto my knees, and opened the folder I'd been curating for months. I opened the file. KLV Strategic Holdings, LLC, initial funds transfer. It was already filled out. All it needed was my signature. With a few keystrokes, I moved $80,000 into the shell company, one Seraphine wouldn't be able to trace back to me without help. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was positioning. Seconds after the confirmation hit my inbox, my phone lit up. "Jared, the advisory board slot is yours. Let's shake things up." Jared was an old college friend, sharp, principled, and already reshaping community investment through quieter, smarter deals. He didn't ask questions. He just opened doors. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of tea. No wine, no celebration, just jasmine, steeped long enough to bite back. Later that evening, as I scrolled through my phone, Seraphine's Thanksgiving post appeared. A family photo, perfectly staged, everyone smiling. The caption read, "Gratitude begins at home, so lucky to be surrounded by greatness." I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened Twitter, tapped New Post, and uploaded the same photo from her feed. Caption, "Family is where truth dies quietly." I didn't hit publish. I tapped Save as draft. For now. The tweet stayed in drafts, just a blinking cursor beneath those heavy words. I closed my laptop, took a long sip of peppermint tea, and stared out the window into the darkness beyond. The lights from the neighboring buildings flickered like stars that had forgotten their purpose. I didn't post the truth that night, but I didn't let it go either. 2 mornings later, I was downtown, hair pulled back, slacks pressed, flats scuffed from wear but clean. I wasn't dressed to impress anyone, just focused. I had a meeting on the 27th floor of a sleek glass tower with a small capital group considering funding part of the studio initiative I'd been quietly building. They'd asked for projections. I brought something better: vision. As I stepped through the building's revolving door, the air shifted, cooler, sharper, corporate. Everyone moved with coffee-fueled purpose and Bluetooth confidence. I found the elevators, tapped the button, and waited. The doors slid open and I stepped inside alone. For a moment, the silence felt comforting. Then, a voice behind me. "Well, look who's decided to step out of her art cave." Seraphine. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Her perfume had always arrived before she did. Lilac and assertion. She stepped in and stood to my left. The doors slid shut and the world shrank to polished chrome and tension. Her reflection in the mirrored elevator wall didn't wait long. Still chasing that artsy side hustle? Must be exhausting trying to make thrift store dreams work in a building like this. She glanced around, then added with a laugh, "This place is out of your league, Kay." I finally turned my head just slightly, not enough to give her full eye contact, just enough for her to feel the dismissal. We rose in silence past the 5th floor. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight the way she always did when she thought she'd won something. Then, ding. The elevator slowed, the doors opened, and a man stepped in. Trim gray suit, effortless presence, voice like a calm thunderstorm. "Mr. Altman." Seraphine straightened immediately, eyes wide, teeth ready. "What a surprise. I didn't realize you were back in town." He nodded briefly, polite but distant. "Seraphine." Then his eyes moved past her and landed on me. His entire face lit up. "Kaylin Vaughn?" I blinked. "Yes." He laughed, warm and genuine. "It's really you? I haven't seen you since the Columbia Equity Conference. You wrote that piece on vertical market pivots. I still reference it in meetings." I smiled, a little stunned. "That feels like a lifetime ago." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just good work standing the test of time." Seraphine didn't speak. Her smile hung awkwardly midair like a joke that no one laughed at. Altman leaned back slightly, casual but fully in control. "We're restructuring the executive board. A few departments need a new lens. I'd love to hear where your head is at these days. Maybe over coffee next week?" I met his gaze and nodded. "I'd like that." The elevator chimed again. 27th floor. I stepped out. The doors stayed open for a beat too long, just enough for me to glance back. Seraphine was still inside. She hadn't moved, her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, with something colder, recognition. That the power balance had shifted, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I walked to my meeting and didn't look back. That evening, after dinner and a walk with Maya, I settled into my reading chair. The city buzzed softly outside. My phone lit up with a message. "Meeting confirmed. You have more leverage than you realize." I stared at the text for a long moment, then archived it. I didn't need to react. I just needed to keep moving. And that leverage? She was about to use it where it hurt most. That evening, after the encounter in the elevator, I didn't go home right away. I stopped by the coffee shop around the corner from my building, a quiet place with creaky wooden chairs and a no-nonsense barista who remembered my order before I even spoke. I needed somewhere still, somewhere off the grid. I opened my laptop, connected to their Wi-Fi, and typed in a string of keywords I hadn't used in years. Seraphine plus SEC plus employee equity filings. The system pulled up documents, quarterly disclosures, earnings calls, stockholder notices, all dry reading unless you were looking for holes. And I was. 10 minutes in, I saw it. Tucked beneath a subfolder labeled Incentives, Seraphine's firm had quietly launched a limited employee equity program, likely to attract young talent, but someone in their legal team had gotten sloppy. The structure technically allowed for external, non-employee purchase through a secondary offering channel. It wasn't illegal, just unusual. I sat back, fingers resting on the keyboard. My heart wasn't pounding. It wasn't even racing. It just felt still, focused. By the next morning, I'd called Gregory, an old friend from business school who now ran a quiet little investment firm in New Jersey. "Don't use my name," I said. "Just follow this paper trail and buy in small increments. Nothing above the disclosure threshold." Greg chuckled. "I've missed this side of you. Quiet, methodical vengeance." "Not vengeance," I corrected. "Correction." Within 2 weeks, my LLC legally held just under 3% of Seraphine's equity. It wasn't enough to influence policy, but it was enough to grant me access, including access to their upcoming quarterly shareholder and board meeting. The invitation came in a thick white envelope. Seraphine's company branding was embossed in silver, trying hard to impress. I ran my fingers across the seal before opening it. Inside, a formal RSVP card, agenda, and location details for the downtown gathering. I checked the date. 2 days from now. I smiled. On the morning of the meeting, I got dressed with care, not out of vanity, but precision. A navy blue pantsuit, soft wool, tailored to fit just right at the waist. Underneath, a muted cream blouse. Nothing flashy, just sharp enough to say, I don't need to prove anything. I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist greeted me with a nod, handed me a folder with the day's schedule, and gestured toward the conference room. The boardroom was glass-walled, sunlit, and humming with nervous energy. Executives, assistants, analysts, they all moved like bees in a hive, buzzing politely, not quite sure where to land. I walked in, took a seat near the end of the long oak table, and placed my folder quietly in front of me. At first, no one paid me much attention, just another guest in a sea of observers, until she walked in. Seraphine. Her eyes swept the room and landed on me. For a split second, she paused mid-step. Then she recovered, plastered on that corporate smile of hers, and kept walking to the head of the table. The meeting began with updates, market performance, staffing reports, future projections. Seraphine led the slideshow with rehearsed confidence, clicking through each slide like clockwork, until slide 12, projected revenue, 5-year forecast. I raised my hand. There was a beat of confusion. One of the board members looked around, unsure who I was. "Yes?" the chair prompted. I stood, calm and steady. "Kaylin Vaughn, shareholder." Seraphine's hand froze on the remote. You could almost hear the air change in the room. "I had a question regarding the assumptions on your projected growth," I continued. "Specifically, the compounding return rates you've assigned to the A-series verticals. Based on your own Q1 earnings and market response, these numbers don't align." I handed a copy of a printed spreadsheet across the table. "I ran a few models myself. If you apply corrected margins, you'll see a 17% differential. Downward." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the older board members, an accountant by posture if not by title, squinted at the paper, then nodded. "She's right." Seraphine tried to speak. "Well, I mean, those figures were preliminary and—" "Then perhaps they shouldn't be used for shareholder influence," I replied. My voice wasn't loud, but it landed. Another executive seated beside the window added, "Let's flag this for review next week. We can't afford misaligned optics in a quarter like this." Seraphine's expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened just slightly. Her knuckles were pale where she gripped the presentation remote. I sat down quietly. No drama, no gloating. Just presence. The rest of the meeting passed without further tension, but the mood had shifted. Eyes kept sliding toward me, measuring, evaluating. When it adjourned, I stood, gathered my things, and made my way toward the elevator. I didn't expect her to follow, but just as the doors opened, she was there. Seraphine. "You've made your point," she hissed under her breath. I turned slowly to face her, met her eyes, full on. "Not yet," I said, "but I will." And I stepped into the elevator, letting the doors close between us. That night, a message buzzed on my phone, this time from Gregory. "Meeting confirmed. You have more leverage than you realize." And the point? It was going to be delivered. on the biggest stage Seraphine had ever stood on. After that boardroom encounter, I didn't sleep. Not because of adrenaline, but because of clarity. The moment I walked out of that building, I knew where the final blow would land. And it wasn't in a courtroom or in the press. It would be right where Seraphine's ego lived, in the eyes of people who once admired her. 2 days later, a press release floated across my inbox. Pacific Tech Philanthropy Gala to honor Seraphine Vaughn as Entrepreneur of the Year? I didn't flinch. I just opened a locked drawer in my apartment and pulled out a thin folder marked Trust, Sequoia Holdings. 3 months earlier, before any of this blew open, I'd made an anonymous donation through that very trust, a donation large enough to make me the lead sponsor of the gala, a donation no one tied to me, not even the event's director. It was my way of staying close to her world without her ever noticing. I didn't need credit. I needed proximity and leverage. Now I was ready to use both. That morning, I had coffee with the event coordinator at a quiet cafe downtown. She still didn't know who I was, just the woman behind the money, going by the initials KV in our formal agreement. I just wanted to ensure everything is finalized, I said, stirring a small spoon through my espresso. The stage design, the music, the tone of the evening. Oh, absolutely. Your list was followed to the letter. We've got the string quartet opening with Barber's Adagio, just like you requested. Very elegant. The lighting team's got your cues, and your selected presenter is confirmed for the award. And the script? I asked gently, eyes fixed on hers. She pulled out a crisp sheet from her binder. It ends exactly how you wrote it. I nodded, paid the check, and walked out into a slow California morning. The sun was low. The sky, gold-brushed. And for once, I didn't feel like the one being dragged behind someone else's shine. That night, the spotlight was mine. By evening, the Pacific Tech Philanthropy Gala buzzed with media vans and velvet ropes. Outside the entrance of the Fairmont, limousines rolled to a stop one by one. The red carpet shimmered under flashbulbs. Seraphine arrived in a fitted champagne gown, her diamond necklace catching every light. She beamed as reporters shouted her name, as guests turned to admire her. A camera caught her smirking toward one woman and whispering something that made them both laugh. She hadn't seen me yet. My car pulled in 10 minutes later. I wore a navy floor-length gown, minimalist, sharp-lined, with no jewelry but a vintage silver pin I'd found in a thrift store years ago. I stepped out alone. For a moment, cameras hesitated. Then they turned. Not all of them, but enough to make her head jerk slightly toward the motion. Her gaze landed on me. And though she tried to smile, it faltered just enough for me to see the flicker of something real beneath her polished facade. Confusion. Maybe it was the press. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe, in some small corner of her mind, she already knew. Inside the ballroom, the lighting was soft amber. Tables were set with white orchids and names etched in gold. I was seated quietly at a table near the stage. No one approached me. That was by design. When the dinner ended, the lights dimmed. A hush fell across the room as the presenter, a respected economist Seraphine had once tried to recruit, stepped up to the podium. He spoke of innovation, of resilience, of philanthropy born from adversity. Then he said, "This year's award is made possible by a woman who has given generously, not just with her resources, but with her quiet dignity. A woman who's lived her truth, even when others tried to erase it." Seraphine smiled, until the spotlight turned. To present this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award, please welcome our lead sponsor, Kaylin Vaughn. The silence hit like thunder. I rose, walked slowly without rushing to the stage. The clicking of camera shutters was almost deafening. Seraphine froze in her seat, her eyes wide, her hands stiff in her lap. I took the microphone. "Good evening," I began. "Most of you don't know me, and if you do, you probably only heard the version told by someone else. That's okay, I'm not here to retell the past, I'm here to mark something different. A beat passed. There are those who build reputations by stepping over others, And then there are those who survive the crushing weight of being stepped on and still choose not to flatten anyone in return. I looked out at the crowd. I stand for the latter. A pause. And tonight, I'm proud to support an event that lifts voices, opens doors, and reminds every woman watching, especially the quiet ones, you're not invisible. Not to me. Not anymore. The applause rose like a wave, stronger than I expected, longer than I'd imagined. I stepped back, nodded to the presenter, and walked off stage. Seraphine was still in her chair, her smile stretched too tight, her eyes locked onto mine as I passed. She didn't follow. Not right away. It was in the hallway near the restroom, 15 minutes later, that she cornered me. "You've made your point," she hissed under her breath. "Loud and clear." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply met her eyes and said, "Not yet. But I will." Then I walked away, leaving her behind. The ballroom lights had dimmed. Applause still echoed in my chest hours later as I sat alone in my hotel suite, heels off, hair loosened, dress folded over the chair. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. First, a call from Seraphine, then a second, then 3 texts. "You've had your moment. Are you done yet? You embarrassed the family. For what? Validation? Don't forget who carried you before you found yourself." I didn't reply. Then came the voice memo, from Mother. "You've made your point. Now come fix this. Your sister's in pieces. We didn't raise you to be cruel." Cruel. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then pressed delete. One swipe. Gone. And I didn't feel guilt. Not even a tremor of hesitation. The next morning, I was sitting across from my attorney, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug that said, "Still standing." The documents were stacked neatly on the table. "Kaylin, once you sign this, the trust dissolves entirely," Mr. Abrams said, sliding the pen toward me. "The family no longer has any stake in the house, or its equity. It all reverts to you as the original silent contributor." I signed without fanfare. Line by line, my name flowed across the paper. With every stroke of ink, a weight lifted, quietly. No drama, no announcement, just resolution. 3 months ago, Seraphine had no idea I'd gone back through every financial record tied to the family trust. Years of backhanded deductions, unapproved withdrawals, even fake expenses filed under my name, all conveniently handled by Mother. Mr. Abrams had compiled it all in a confidential audit. The judge hadn't blinked when the evidence was presented. "This is more than negligence," she'd said. "It's manipulation." Now, with everything finally signed, I held the final deed in my hands. My name was printed in bold, without theirs beneath it. I stepped outside the building and breathed in deep. It was early spring, the breeze just warm enough to hint at something new. Instead of heading back to my apartment, I drove to the family home. Not for them. For me. The door creaked open like it always had. Inside, the house was silent, emptier than I remembered. Most of the furniture had been cleared, the personal things boxed away or claimed. The hallway still held framed portraits of Seraphine, her graduation, her wedding, the photo with the governor. Mine? Nowhere. They'd never been there. I wandered through the kitchen, ran my fingers over the worn edge of the counter where I'd once chopped vegetables for family dinners, stepped into the sunroom, where my grandfather used to read me poetry when no one else remembered I existed. In the corner of the living room, a small stack of boxes waited. One caught my eye. Written in faded cursive, "Kaylin." I sat cross-legged and opened the lid slowly. Inside, a yellowed hospital bracelet, a baby photo, half wrinkled, a crayon drawing of a tree with 2 uneven stick figures, one labeled me, the other Papa, and beneath it all, a single folded note. "You were always the quiet one. Love, Mom." I didn't cry. I smiled, strangely, not bitter, just done. There was peace in knowing I didn't need an apology to close a door. Some stories don't end with reconciliation, they end with understanding. I took one thing from that house. Just one. The photo of me and my grandfather from when I was maybe 7. We were both laughing. He'd believed in me, even when my own parents had treated me like a backup plan. Back at my office, my own office, I placed that photo on my desk, right next to the window that overlooked the city I built myself into. 2 weeks later, I hosted my first summit for women entrepreneurs. The room was full of stories, resilient, powerful, ordinary women like me. Not the loudest ones in the room, but the most persistent. I stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and smiled at them. If I've learned anything, I said, it's that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation, sometimes it's power. And just because someone tries to write you out of your own life doesn't mean they succeed. A pause. A beat. I was never anyone's +1. I was always the main event. They stood. Applause rang through the hall. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for resolve. For every woman who ever got erased, underestimated, overlooked, this was for them. And for the girl in the drawing who never got her name written on the wall, I see her now, and she's doing just fine.